Sarah Martinez walked through the heavy glass doors of the Veterans Affairs building, her worn combat boots making soft, squeaking sounds against the polished marble floor. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the exhaustion that had settled into her features like dust after a long journey. Her military uniform, once a deep forest green, had faded to something closer to sage after countless washes and years of wear. The fabric showed signs of use, small pulls in the material, slight discoloration around the collar, where sweat had accumulated during long days in the field, and creases that no amount of ironing could completely smooth away. But Sarah wore it with the same pride she had felt the day she first put it on 12 years ago. The waiting area buzzed with quiet conversation as other veterans filled out paperwork, spoke with counselors, or simply sat in the comfortable chairs, staring at nothing in particular. Sarah approached the reception desk where a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and immaculate makeup looked up at her with barely concealed disdain. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone suggesting she would rather be doing anything else. "I have an appointment at 10:30 with Dr. Richardson about my disability claim," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. The receptionist's eyes traveled slowly from Sarah's scuffed boots up to her faded uniform, lingering on every imperfection. Her nose wrinkled slightly, as if she detected an unpleasant odor. "Name." "Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez." The woman typed something into her computer with unnecessarily aggressive keystrokes. "I don't see you in the system. Are you sure you have the right day?" Sarah pulled out a worn piece of paper from her jacket pocket. The appointment confirmation letter was slightly crumpled from being folded and unfolded multiple times. "It's right here, 10:30, November 15th. The receptionist glanced at the paper without really reading it. "Well, the system shows differently. You'll need to reschedule." "Ma'am, I drove 3 hours to get here. I took time off work. Could you please check again?" "Look, honey," the receptionist said with fake sweetness that dripped condescension. "I know what I'm looking at. Maybe if you dressed more appropriately, these mix-ups wouldn't happen. This is a professional environment." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her composure. Years of military training had taught her to control her emotions, even when faced with disrespect. "This is my service uniform. I wore it because I thought it would be appropriate for a veteran's appointment." "Service uniform?" The receptionist laughed, a sharp sound that carried across the waiting room. Several people turned to look. "That old thing looks more like something you'd find at a thrift store. Real military uniforms don't look like that." An elderly man sitting nearby shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He wore a Vietnam veteran's cap and kept glancing between Sarah and the receptionist with growing displeasure. A middle-aged woman pretended to read a magazine while obviously listening to every word. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I served 3 tours in Afghanistan. This uniform has seen more action than—" "Save it," the receptionist interrupted, holding up her hand. "I've heard every sob story in the book. Half the people who come in here aren't even real veterans. They just want free benefits." She looked Sarah up and down again with obvious skepticism. "I mean, look at you. If you were really in the military, wouldn't you take better care of your appearance?" The waiting room had gone quiet now. Even the soft background music seemed to have stopped. Sarah was aware that everyone was watching this exchange, but she refused to back down. She had faced enemy fire, improvised explosive devices, and the chaos of war zones. She would not be intimidated by a civilian with an attitude problem. "I understand you're just doing your job," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm, "but I need to speak with your supervisor." The receptionist rolled her eyes dramatically. "He's busy with important matters, not dealing with walk-ins who can't keep track of their appointments." "Then I'll wait." "Suit yourself, but you'll be waiting a long time." Sarah found an empty chair near the window and sat down, placing her small backpack on the floor beside her. The leather was cracked and worn, another piece of equipment that had served her well during her military service. She pulled out a book and tried to focus on reading, but the receptionist's words kept echoing in her mind. The elderly veteran with the Vietnam cap approached her during a quiet moment. "Don't let her get to you, soldier," he said in a low voice. "Some people don't understand what service means." Sarah looked up and smiled gratefully. "Thank you, sir. It's just frustrating." "I know, been there myself." He glanced toward the reception desk where the blonde woman was now filing her nails. That one's been causing problems for months. We've complained, but nothing changes. As the morning wore on, Sarah watched other veterans come and go. She noticed how the receptionist treated each one differently based on their appearance. Well-dressed veterans with newer clothing received warm smiles and efficient service. Those who looked like they were struggling financially, or whose clothing showed signs of wear, were met with suspicion and barely concealed contempt. A young man in a wheelchair, wearing a faded Marines t-shirt, rolled up to the desk. Sarah could see the prosthetic legs beneath his jeans, evidence of injuries sustained in service. The receptionist looked annoyed before he even spoke. "I'm here for my physical therapy appointment," he said politely. "You need to check in at the medical wing, not here," she snapped without looking at her computer. "But the letter says..." "I don't care what your letter says. Medical appointments are handled differently." The young Marine looked confused and embarrassed. Sarah stood up, unable to stay silent any longer. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the desk. "I heard him mention physical therapy. That's coordinated through this office for service-connected disabilities." The receptionist glared at her. "No one asked for your opinion. I'm just trying to help a fellow veteran get the care he needs." "Well, maybe if either of you looked like you actually served, I might take you seriously." The words hung in the air like a slap. The Marine in the wheelchair stared at the receptionist in disbelief. Sarah felt something snap inside her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Ma'am, with respect, both of us have sacrificed more for this country than you can imagine. We've earned the right to be treated with dignity." "Oh, please," the receptionist said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Spare me the heroic speeches. If you were really heroes, you wouldn't be here begging for handouts." The waiting room erupted in angry murmurs. Several veterans stood up, their faces showing a mixture of outrage and solidarity. The Vietnam veteran who had spoken to Sarah earlier stepped forward. "That's enough," he said firmly. "These young people served their country honorably. They deserve better than this treatment." The receptionist looked around nervously as she realized the entire room had turned against her. But instead of backing down, she doubled down on her position. "I don't care what any of you think. This is my desk, and I decide who gets help and who doesn't. And I'm telling you," she pointed at Sarah, "that ratty old uniform doesn't fool me. Real soldiers don't look like homeless people." Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she kept them there. Every instinct told her to defend herself more forcefully, but her military training also taught her about chain of command and proper procedures. She would handle this the right way, even if it meant enduring more humiliation. "I'd still like to speak with your supervisor," she said quietly. "And I told you he's busy." "Then I'll wait until he's not busy." The receptionist shrugged and turned back to her computer, effectively dismissing Sarah and the Marine. The message was clear. They were not worth her time or attention. Sarah helped the young Marine locate the correct office for his appointment, then returned to her seat by the window. The book in her hands might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the comprehension she had. Her mind kept replaying the conversation, each insult feeling like a fresh wound. She thought about her time in Afghanistan, the long nights standing guard in hostile territory, the friends she had lost, the close calls that still woke her up in cold sweats. She remembered the weight of her gear during 20-mile marches, the sand that got into everything, the constant vigilance required to stay alive in a war zone. She thought about the medal in her dresser drawer at home, the one she never wore because it reminded her of the day her convoy hit an IED, and she had to drag her wounded squad leader to safety under enemy fire. None of that seemed to matter here, in this sterile government building where appearances counted more than service. Around noon, Sarah noticed increased activity near the main entrance. Several people in business suits were walking quickly through the lobby, their faces serious and focused. She could hear fragments of conversation about some kind of inspection or visit, but she couldn't make out the details. The receptionist suddenly became much more attentive to her appearance, checking her makeup in a small mirror and straightening her blouse. Whatever was happening, it was important enough to make her nervous. Sarah checked her watch. She had been waiting for over an hour and a half, and her appointment time had long passed. Her supervisor at the auto parts store where she worked part-time had not been happy about her taking the day off, and she couldn't afford to lose that job. But she also couldn't afford to miss this appointment. The disability benefits she was applying for would help cover her medical expenses and maybe allow her to cut back her work hours so she could attend college. The future she was trying to build seemed to hang in the balance, and it was all being threatened by one person's prejudices and assumptions. As she sat there, Sarah reflected on the strange irony of her situation. She had fought for freedom and democracy in a foreign country, had risked her life to protect the rights and liberties that Americans enjoyed. But now, back home, she was being denied basic respect and dignity by someone who had never served a day in uniform. The waiting room around her continued to buzz with quiet conversations between veterans, sharing their own stories of bureaucratic frustration and disrespect. Sarah realized she was not alone in this experience, that many of her fellow service members faced similar challenges when trying to access the benefits they had earned through their sacrifice and service. This realization both comforted and saddened her. It was good to know she wasn't the only one struggling, but it was heartbreaking to think that this kind of treatment was common enough to be a shared experience among veterans. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the waiting room floor, Sarah made a quiet promise to herself. No matter how long it took, no matter what obstacles were placed in her path, she would not give up. She had not survived 3 combat tours to be defeated by a receptionist's prejudice. She settled back in her chair, opened her book again, and prepared to wait as long as necessary. Outside, life in the city continued its normal pace, but inside this building, a battle of a different kind was being fought, a battle for respect, dignity, and the right to receive the benefits that had been earned through service and sacrifice. The atmosphere in the Veterans Affairs building shifted dramatically around 2 o'clock, when a small group of high-ranking military officials entered through the main doors. Sarah looked up from her book as she heard the sharp sound of polished dress shoes against the marble floor, a rhythm that immediately commanded attention. Leading the group was a woman in an immaculate navy dress uniform, her silver stars gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Behind her walked 2 colonels and what appeared to be a senior civilian administrator. The receptionist's demeanor changed instantly upon seeing them. She straightened in her chair, quickly closed whatever personal website she had been browsing, and plastered on her most professional smile. "Good afternoon," the woman with the stars said as she approached the reception desk. Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of command experience. "I'm Brigadier General Patricia Williams. I'm here for an unannounced inspection of this facility." The receptionist's face went pale. "Oh, General Williams, welcome. I wasn't expecting. No one told me." "That's the point of unannounced inspections," the general replied dryly. "I want to see how this facility operates on a normal day, not when everyone's on their best behavior because they know I'm coming." Sarah watched the exchange with interest, noting how the general's eyes swept across the waiting room, taking in every detail. Her gaze lingered on the veterans scattered throughout the area, some reading, others dozing in chairs, a few engaged in quiet conversation. "I see you have quite a few veterans waiting," General Williams observed. "How long have they been here?" The receptionist glanced nervously toward Sarah, clearly remembering their earlier confrontation. "Oh, not long at all. We're very efficient here." The elderly Vietnam veteran who had spoken kindly to Sarah earlier stood up slowly, using his cane for support. "Excuse me, General, but that's not accurate." General Williams turned her attention to him immediately. "Please, tell me what you've observed." "Well, ma'am, that young lady over there," he gestured toward Sarah, "has been waiting since 10:30 this morning for her appointment. She was told her appointment didn't exist, even though she has documentation." The general's eyes moved to Sarah, taking in her faded uniform with a practiced military assessment. Sarah stood up respectfully, coming to attention as she had been trained. "At ease, soldier," General Williams said, approaching her. "What's your name and rank?" "Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, ma'am, 3rd Infantry Division." "How many deployments, Staff Sergeant?" "3, ma'am. Afghanistan, 2019 through 2022. General Williams nodded, her expression becoming more serious. "And you've been waiting here since 10:30 for an appointment that supposedly doesn't exist?" "Yes, ma'am. I have the confirmation letter here." Sarah handed over the crumpled paper, which the general examined carefully. Her jaw tightened as she read the details. "This is clearly a valid appointment confirmation," she said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. She turned back toward the reception desk where the blonde woman was now fidgeting nervously with her pen. "Miss," the general paused, waiting for a name. "Jennifer Walsh," the receptionist supplied weakly. "Miss Walsh, can you explain why Staff Sergeant Martinez was told her appointment doesn't exist when she clearly has valid documentation?" Jennifer's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. "Well, the computer system has been having problems lately. Sometimes appointments don't show up properly." "I see. And how do you typically handle such technical difficulties?" We usually ask people to reschedule." General Williams raised an eyebrow. "Without attempting to verify the appointment through other means, without consulting with supervisors or checking backup systems. The system is usually reliable." "But you just said it's been having problems lately." The general's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "That seems contradictory." The Vietnam veteran stepped forward again. "General, if I may, there's more to this story." "Please continue." "This young lady was treated very disrespectfully. Miss Walsh made comments about her appearance, questioned whether she was really a veteran, and suggested she was here looking for handouts." General Williams' face darkened. "Is this true, Staff Sergeant Martinez?" Sarah hesitated. She had been raised to respect authority and avoid causing trouble, even when she was the victim of mistreatment. But the general's direct question demanded an honest answer. "Yes, ma'am. Miss Walsh made several comments about my uniform being inappropriate for a professional environment. She said it looked like something from a thrift store, and that real military uniforms don't look like this." The waiting room had gone completely silent. Even the background music seemed to have stopped. General Williams studied Sarah's uniform with the expert eye of someone who had served for over 25 years. "Staff Sergeant, when did you last have this uniform cleaned and pressed?" 2 days ago, ma'am. I wanted to look my best for this appointment." "And where did you serve in Afghanistan?" "Forward Operating Base Chapman primarily, ma'am. Some time at Bagram Airfield and various remote outposts." General Williams nodded slowly. "Fob Chapman, hostile territory, lots of dust storms, intense heat, challenging conditions." "Yes, ma'am." The general moved closer to examine Sarah's uniform more carefully. Her trained eyes picked out details that most civilians would never notice. The subtle fatting pattern on the sleeves indicated long hours in desert sun. The slight wear on the shoulder area showed where body armor had rubbed repeatedly. The careful repairs along one seam suggested field maintenance under difficult conditions. "Miss Walsh," the general said without turning around, "do you see this small hole near the left pocket?" Jennifer leaned forward nervously. Yes." "That's not wear from normal use. That's from shrapnel, probably from an IED or mortar round." She pointed to a barely visible discoloration on the sleeve. "This staining here, that's not dirt that didn't come out in the wash. That's from blood and sand mixed together in a combat zone." The reception area was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. General Williams continued her examination. "These creases along the back, they're from where this uniform was worn under 50 pounds of combat gear, day after day, in temperatures that regularly exceeded 100 degrees. She looked up at Jennifer, her eyes cold with barely controlled anger. "This uniform has seen more action than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. It represents service, sacrifice, and honor." Jennifer's face had gone from pale to bright red. I didn't know." "No, you didn't know. But instead of treating this veteran with respect while you figured out the appointment situation, you chose to make assumptions based on appearance." The general's voice rose slightly, carrying across the room. "You chose to question her integrity, her service, and her right to be here." Sarah watched in amazement as this senior officer defended her in a way she had never experienced. Throughout her military career, she had served under good leaders and poor ones, but she had never seen someone in such a high position take such a personal interest in ensuring a lower-ranking soldier was treated properly. "Ma'am," one of the colonels who had arrived with the general spoke up, "should we continue with the inspection?" General Williams held up her hand. "We'll continue, but first we're going to resolve Staff Sergeant Martinez's appointment issue." She turned back to Jennifer. "I want you to check every system you have access to, call your supervisor, call the appointment scheduling department. Do whatever it takes to figure out why this appointment was marked as non-existent." "Yes, ma'am, right away." Jennifer's fingers flew over her keyboard with a speed she hadn't demonstrated all morning. Within minutes, she had found the appointment in a secondary scheduling system. "Here it is," she said weakly. "It was in the system, just not in the one I usually check." "So the appointment was valid all along?" "Yes, ma'am." General Williams turned back to Sarah. "Staff Sergeant, I apologize on behalf of the Veterans Affairs System for the treatment you received here today. This is not how we take care of our own." "Thank you, ma'am, but it's not your fault." "It absolutely is my responsibility. Every veteran who walks through these doors has earned the right to be treated with dignity and respect. When that doesn't happen, it's a failure of leadership at every level." The general pulled out her phone and made a quick call. Sarah could hear only one side of the conversation, but it was clear that someone was getting instructions to ensure her appointment was handled immediately and properly. "Dr. Richardson will see you in 10 minutes, she announced after ending the call. "Your case will be expedited, and you'll have a decision on your disability claim within 2 weeks instead of the usual 6 months. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, ma'am. I don't know what to say." "Don't thank me. You earned this through your service. I'm just making sure you get what you deserve." As if the morning's events weren't dramatic enough, the young Marine in the wheelchair returned from his appointment in the medical wing. He rolled up to the group around the reception desk, clearly curious about what was happening. "James Morrison," he introduced himself to the general, "Corporal 2nd Marines." "Brigadier General Williams," she replied, shaking his hand. "I understand you had some difficulties earlier as well." James glanced at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Yes, ma'am. I was told I was in the wrong place for my physical therapy appointment, even though my letter clearly stated this office." The general's expression grew even more stern. "Miss Walsh, is this another case of system confusion?" Jennifer looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. I might have made an error." "You might have made an error." "I was mistaken about where physical therapy appointments are coordinated." General Williams studied the young corporal's prosthetic legs and the medical paperwork clutched in his hand. "Corporal Morrison, when did you lose your legs?" "Roadside bomb in Syria, ma'am, 18 months ago." "And this is your first time trying to access VA services for your injuries?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been putting it off, trying to handle everything on my own." The general's face softened slightly. "That's admirable, but you don't have to handle everything alone. That's why we have these services." She turned back to Jennifer with renewed anger. "So this young man who sacrificed his legs for his country was turned away when he finally decided to seek the help he needs." "I was confused about the procedures." "No, you weren't confused. You made assumptions just like you did with Staff Sergeant Martinez. You saw someone you thought didn't meet your standards of how a veteran should look, and you decided they weren't worth your time or effort." The other veterans in the waiting room began to speak up, sharing their own experiences with Jennifer's treatment. One after another, they described encounters similar to Sarah's and James's. A pattern emerged of discrimination based on appearance, with well-dressed veterans receiving excellent service while those who showed signs of struggle were treated with suspicion and contempt. General Williams listened to each account with growing disgust. "How long has this been going on?" she asked the room in general. "Months," replied the Vietnam veteran. "We've tried complaining through proper channels, but nothing changed." "Where is your supervisor, Miss Walsh?" He's at lunch." "At lunch, it's 2:30 in the afternoon." Jennifer shrugged helplessly, clearly realizing that every answer she gave was making her situation worse. "Colonel Henderson," the general said to one of her companions, "I want a full investigation of this office. Interview every veteran who's had contact with this facility in the past 6 months. I want to know the scope of this problem." "Yes, ma'am." "And I want Miss Walsh suspended pending the completion of that investigation." Jennifer's eyes widened in panic. "Suspended, but I need this job." "You should have thought about that before you decided to treat our nation's veterans like second-class citizens," the general replied coldly. A man in a business suit came hurrying across the lobby, clearly responding to some kind of alert about the inspection. He approached the group with the nervous energy of someone who knew he was in serious trouble. "General Williams, I'm David Peterson, the facility supervisor. I apologize for not being here when you arrived. I was at a meeting across town and came as soon as I got word. Mr. Peterson, are you aware of how your staff treats veterans in this facility? We strive to provide excellent customer service to all our clients. Clients? The general's voice dropped dangerously low. These aren't clients, Mr. Peterson. These are veterans. They're not here asking for favors. They're here to receive benefits they earned through service and sacrifice. Peterson's face went pale as he began to understand the gravity of the situation. Has there been a complaint? Multiple complaints. Your receptionist has been systematically discriminating against veterans based on their appearance, questioning their service, and denying them access to appointments and services they're entitled to receive. As the conversation continued, Sarah found herself amazed by the transformation that had occurred in just a few hours. She had arrived that morning feeling powerless and humiliated, facing a system that seemed designed to frustrate and discourage her. Now, thanks to the unexpected arrival of General Williams, she was witnessing accountability in action. The general's inspection revealed problems far beyond Jennifer's behavior. The facility had inadequate staffing, outdated computer systems, and a culture that prioritized efficiency over compassion. But it also revealed something else. When the right leader showed up and demanded excellence, change could happen quickly. As Sarah was finally called for her appointment with Dr. Richardson, she realized that this day had taught her something important about advocacy and standing up for herself and others. Sometimes the system worked, but only when people in positions of authority demanded that it work properly. Sarah's appointment with Dr. Richardson lasted nearly 2 hours, far longer than the typical 15-minute session most veterans experienced. The doctor, clearly having been briefed on the morning's events, took extra time to thoroughly document her service-related injuries and medical conditions. When she emerged from the medical wing, she found General Williams waiting in the lobby, reviewing paperwork with her staff. "How did it go, Staff Sergeant?" the general asked, looking up from a thick folder. "Very well, ma'am. Dr. Richardson was extremely thorough. He said my claim should be approved without any issues." "Good, that's how every veteran should be treated when they seek help." General Williams gestured to a quiet corner of the lobby. "Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to speak with you privately." They settled into comfortable chairs away from the main traffic flow. The general's aide positioned himself nearby, but out of earshot, a practiced gesture that allowed for private conversation while maintaining security protocols. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, I want you to know that what happened here today is not representative of how the VA system is supposed to work," the general began. "But I also want to acknowledge that your experience isn't unique. Too many veterans face similar challenges when trying to access their benefits." Sarah nodded. "I've heard stories from other veterans, ma'am. Some just give up rather than deal with the hassle." "That's exactly what concerns me most. We lose good people because the system fails them when they need it most." The general leaned forward slightly. "I've read your service record while you were in your appointment. 3 combat deployments, multiple commendations, exemplary performance reviews. You're exactly the kind of person the military needs to keep, but you chose to separate after your contract ended. Why?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She had expected to discuss the day's events, not her decision to leave the military. "It wasn't an easy choice, ma'am. I loved serving, loved my soldiers, loved the mission. But after 3 deployments, I was burned out. I needed time to figure out who I was outside of the military." "And how's that going for you?" Sarah hesitated. The honest answer was complicated. "Some days better than others, ma'am. The transition has been harder than I expected. Finding work dealing with medical issues, navigating civilian systems like this one. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice." General Williams nodded knowingly. "The transition is never easy. Even with all the programs and resources available, it's still a significant life change. What are your goals now?" "I want to go to college, ma'am. Study social work or counseling. Maybe find a way to help other veterans who are struggling with transition issues." "That's a worthy goal and very much needed." The general pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "I'm going to give you some information that might be helpful." For the next 20 minutes, General Williams provided Sarah with a wealth of resources she had never heard of. Special scholarship programs for veterans, mentorship opportunities, internship programs with veteran service organizations, and contact information for people who could help navigate the various systems involved in veteran benefits and education. "Ma'am, why are you doing all this for me?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. General Williams smiled, the first time Sarah had seen her expression soften since she arrived. "Because 15 years ago, I was a young captain who looked a lot like you. I had just returned from my first deployment in Iraq, and I was trying to figure out whether to stay in the military or pursue civilian opportunities." She paused, looking out the window at the busy street beyond. "I ended up in a situation similar to yours, though not quite as dramatic. I was trying to get some paperwork processed at a military personnel office, and a senior civilian employee made it clear that she thought young female officers were just playing dress-up until we found husbands to take care of us." Sarah winced at the casual sexism implied in the comment. A colonel happened to overhear the conversation. Instead of just correcting the employee, he took time to talk with me about my goals and aspirations. He became a mentor who helped shape my entire career. General Williams turned back to Sarah. "That colonel is now a retired 3-star general, and he still checks in on my progress from time to time." "So you're paying it forward?" "Exactly. The military takes care of its own, but that responsibility doesn't end when someone leaves active duty. If anything, it becomes more important because veterans face challenges that active duty personnel don't have to deal with." Their conversation was interrupted by Colonel Henderson, who approached with a tablet full of preliminary investigation results. "Ma'am, we've completed initial interviews with 12 veterans who have used this facility in the past month," he reported. 7 reported negative experiences similar to what we witnessed today. 3 others said they chose not to return after their first visit because of how they were treated. General Williams' jaw tightened. "What about the facility supervisor?" "Mr. Peterson claims he was unaware of the problems. Says he spends most of his time in meetings and relies on his staff to handle day-to-day operations. In other words, he wasn't doing his job of supervising his employees." "That appears to be the case, ma'am." General Williams stood up and walked back toward the reception area, where a temporary replacement had taken over Jennifer's duties. The new employee, an older woman with a warm smile, was efficiently helping veterans and treating everyone with obvious respect and professionalism. "Night and day difference," Sarah observed, following the general. "It's amazing what proper leadership and accountability can accomplish." They found Mr. Peterson in his office, frantically making phone calls and reviewing policy documents. When General Williams knocked on his open door, he looked up with the expression of someone who knew his career was in serious jeopardy. "General Williams, I've been reviewing our procedures, and I think I've identified several areas where we can improve our service delivery." "Mr. Peterson, I'm not interested in your damage control efforts. I'm interested in understanding how this situation was allowed to develop and continue for months without any intervention from management." Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ma'am, Jennifer always received positive performance reviews. Her productivity numbers were good. I had no indication there were problems." "Did you ever observe her interactions with veterans?" "Not directly, no, but like I said, her numbers were good." General Williams sat down across from his desk. "Mr. Peterson, what do you think your primary mission is in this position?" "To ensure efficient processing of veteran benefits and services." "Wrong answer. Your primary mission is to take care of veterans. Everything else is secondary to that goal." She opened a folder she had been carrying and spread several documents across his desk. "These are interview summaries from veterans who have used this facility. Would you like me to read some of their comments about the service they received?" Peterson's face grew pale as the general read account after account of poor treatment, disrespect, and bureaucratic obstacles. Some veterans described being made to feel like they were asking for charity rather than accessing earned benefits. Others talked about being discouraged from filing claims or told that their conditions weren't severe enough to warrant assistance. "Ma'am, I had no idea." "You had no idea because you weren't paying attention to what matters most. You were focused on statistics and efficiency metrics instead of the human beings you're supposed to serve." By the time the conversation ended, it was clear that significant changes were coming to the facility. Peterson would be transferred to a position with no direct veteran contact. Jennifer's employment was terminated immediately. New training programs would be implemented for all staff members. And most importantly, regular unannounced inspections would ensure that improvements were sustained over time. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah watched the transformation of the facility continue. The temporary staff member who had replaced Jennifer was not only more professional, but also more knowledgeable about available services. She was actively helping veterans understand their options rather than simply processing paperwork. Corporal Morrison returned from a successful appointment with the physical therapy coordinator, his face showing relief and optimism for the first time that day. Several other veterans commented on the improved atmosphere and increased helpfulness of the staff. "It's like a completely different place," one elderly veteran remarked to Sarah. "Yes, it is," she agreed, still amazed by how quickly things had changed. Before leaving, General Williams pulled Sarah aside one final time. "Staff Sergeant, I want to leave you with something important to remember. What happened here today started with one person being willing to stand up for what's right. You didn't back down when you were treated disrespectfully. You maintained your dignity and insisted on proper treatment." "I was just trying to get my appointment, ma'am." "You were doing much more than that, even if you didn't realize it at the time. You were standing up not just for yourself, but for every veteran who has been mistreated by this system." General Williams handed Sarah a business card with her direct contact information. "I want you to stay in touch. Let me know how your education goals progress. And if you ever encounter problems like this again, anywhere in the system, I want to hear about it." "Ma'am, I don't want to be someone who complains about every little thing." "Staff Sergeant, there's a difference between complaining and holding people accountable. What you experienced today wasn't a little thing. It was a fundamental failure to treat a veteran with the respect and dignity they deserve." As Sarah prepared to leave the building, she reflected on the extraordinary day she had experienced. She had arrived that morning feeling frustrated and powerless, facing a system that seemed designed to discourage her from getting the help she needed. She was leaving with her benefits claim expedited, her faith in the system partially restored, and a new understanding of her own power to create positive change. The Vietnam veteran who had supported her earlier approached as she headed toward the exit. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what, sir?" "For not giving up, for standing your ground when that woman tried to humiliate you. A lot of us wanted to speak up sooner, but we were worried about making trouble for ourselves." Sarah smiled. "We all have to look out for each other." "Yes, we do. And today you reminded me that it's worth the risk to speak up when something isn't right." As Sarah walked to her car, she thought about General Williams' words regarding leadership and accountability. The day had taught her that individuals could make a difference, but it had also shown her the importance of having leaders who were willing to take action when they discovered problems. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her part-time supervisor, asking how the appointment had gone. Instead of the frustrating story she had expected to tell, she found herself describing a system that, while imperfect, was capable of change when the right people demanded excellence. 2 weeks later, Sarah received notification that her disability claim had been approved at the rating Dr. Richardson had recommended. The monthly compensation would allow her to reduce her work hours and enroll in college full-time. But more importantly, she had learned something valuable about advocacy, leadership, and the responsibility that all veterans shared to take care of each other. Her faded uniform had told a story that day, not of poverty or carelessness, but of service, sacrifice, and honor. And thanks to one general's willingness to listen and act, that story had been heard and respected.